All right. So, welcome to another one-shot interview brought to you by the students of S.H.I.E.L.D. I am your host, Mikey, and joining to me is a man who we did not expect to get, but we are honored that he's with us today. You've known his work from Daredevil and The Flash and Kingdom Come. If you don't know him, you live under a rock. The legend writer, Mark Waid. How you doing? How you doing, sir?
Good. I like your intro. That's good. Legend is good. I like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Kind of just came to me, so I didn't prep this at all. But yeah, we're just obviously we're big fans of your work. I mean, you practically have had a long career in Marvel and DC as well as like independent work as well. And yeah, we're just super happy that you're here to talk with us and just
Great.
blessed.
Happy to be here.
All right, yeah. So I'm just gonna bring it up with my first question. So I just
Sure.
wanted to know, like, how did you get into comics, and like, how did you break into the industry as a writer?
Breaking in was not easy. Breaking in to comics is like trying to break out of a high-tech military compound because the way you do it is unique. And then then they find out how you broke in and they seal it up so nobody ever can get in that way again. For me, it was different. I mean, I got into comics when I was a little kid because I skipped a couple of grades and I was always reading at a young age and stuff. So I started reading Batman comics when I was like three and a half. And I never stopped. I loved comics ever. So even after I discovered Cars and Girls, I was still like, I love comics. I got to go to the comic store every week. And I loved it enough where I wanted to be part of it, but it didn't occur to me I'd be a writer or an artist. I didn't have the patience for that. I thought maybe an editor or something like that was my goal for the longest time growing up. And never dreamed that you could have that many ideas to break in and to come up with new ideas every week for comics. But that said, I was working in my 20s. I was working in the fan press. I was working for magazines and I was interviewing creators. And I was that guy at the convention who would take the professionals back and forth from the airport to connect, to network, to make connections and so forth. And where I got really lucky was that this is 84. And I had a couple of ideas for some Superman stories. Like I said, I didn't think I was going to be a writer, but I had a couple of ideas. And DC Comics had a traveling, I don't want to say roadshow, but they had a traveling program going where they'd go to different cities looking for new talent. And it was always artists. I mean, there were never any writers in the room. There was always artists coming in and having their portfolios reviewed. But every once in a while, somebody like me would come forth. And the guy who was given the seminar, his name was Sal Amendola. He was the talent scout at DC. And I said, got a couple of Superman stories. He said, well, you're in luck. He said, because right now, Julie Schwartz, who has been editing comics since 1944, he's got the Superman books. He's a fan. He grew up. This is a long story, but it's good stuff in it. Julie Schwartz helped invent science fiction fandom. Like there is no science fiction fandom without Julie. In the early days, he was Ray Bradbury's first agent. He was H.P. Lovecraft's last agent. And he came on to DC as an editor in the 40s, but he was always a fan at heart. So he always looked for other fans to, give them an extra break and stuff. So he said, Julie is always interested in, fans approaching us with ideas. And right now, nobody wants to write Superman. Everybody wants to write Batman, which was generally the case. It's like, great. So I went to New York. I sold Julie my story in a pitch meeting, greatest day of my professional life. And then I sold him another story that didn't go as well because it wasn't as good a story. And then nothing. And then that didn't lead into this big, gigantic comics career. What that led to was, well, I kind of had my brush. I don't know if anything will come of it. And I started, again, I was working in the fan press, working at different magazines, covering comics. And I got a call out of the blue from DC. And they were looking for an editor. They were looking for someone to come in and edit a brand new line of creator-owned books that they were going to start. And they were looking for somebody like me who had experience outside of comics. It was, again, in magazine editing. So I went in, took the interview, didn't get the job, but came out of the interview, and Dick Giordano, who was the executive editor there, was a great guy. And he just pulled me aside and said, no, we really like you. As soon as an editorial job comes open in comics in the DC department, DC Comics editorial department, the regular one, we'll call you. And sure enough, he called. He called on April 1st of 1987, and I picked up the phone, and he offered me the job, and I hung up on him because it was April 1st, and I thought somebody was just playing an April Fool joke on me. And my career would have gone completely in a different direction if he never called right back. So he did. Everything was cool. I went in, interviewed, got the job, started working at DC as an editor. And again, that was my career path. That was what I was going to be. But there were a couple of stumbling blocks. One is that it turns out I don't enjoy working in an office very much. I don't really enjoy having a boss. I like being really independent. I was a decent employee, but I was still not. I was always sort of chafing. And the other thing that happened was that because I was editing their anthology books, not just one or two titles, but a bunch of, so I was working with a bunch of different writers, right? Because working on anthology books, every DC writer and half the writers at Marvel were doing stuff over at DC. And all these scripts were coming across my desk. Like all of them, every major, from Neil Gaiman to John Ostrander to Christopher Priest to whoever, name anybody who was writing comics back then. I was Neil's first editor actually at DC. And all the scripts coming across my desk and reading them, I learned more about writing in the 2 years I was there than I would have in 10 years on my own. It was a great boot camp. So when I left staff in '89, at the end of '89, I had made enough connections within, DC. I had enough friends in editorial by that time. Okay, well, Mark is looking for a little gig here. Maybe we can throw Mark a story here. And that quickly blossomed into no one wanted The Flash as a book. No one wanted the book because the TV show had been canceled, and DC was thinking, okay, well, why do we keep this book alive? So they kind of saw no risk to giving it to me. And Brian Augustine was my editor on that, and he and I were best friends. So took the gig there, and I've had a really great run ever since. For 32 years later, everything seems to be clicking.
Wonderful.
Do we have any time left? Is it my 90 minutes? Is that it?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No, we're still plenty of time. Don't worry. Well, yeah, that's very interesting.
All right, so let me rewind to breaking into comics. That's the other question. That was how I broke into comics. No one else is going to break into comics that way. The good news about breaking into comics, if you want to break into comics now, is that the internet has completely democratized the process. If you want to be in comics, go do a web comic. You're in comics. Surprise. It's not like when I was getting in, you had to do your own mini comics and, in black and white, print them up at Kinko's and take them to conventions and hand them to editors and show them your stuff, or give them pitches and hope they would read them. And nowadays, DC and Marvel are owned by such mega conglomerates that they don't even allow you to read pitches, unsolicited submissions. So that's no longer an issue. But the way it works now is a lot of editors and a lot of publishers, including myself, look online for new talent. And if you're doing your own comics online, that's terrific, because it not only is a easy way for you to do your work, and all it costs you is sweat equity, right? Mm-hmm. But if I'm an editor and I'm looking at your work and I see that you're not only publishing a web comic, but you're doing it on a regular basis, like you're every week or every 2 weeks or whatever it is, as long as it's on a regular basis for a length of time, that gives you a leg up, because I look at that and I go, okay, not only do I like the work, but I know this person is a professional. I know this person has a work ethic, and therefore I'm more inclined to give him a gig or her a gig than just somebody whose work I just see without any context. So that's my breaking into comics in 2021 story.
Gotcha. Okay, wow. That's actually very interesting, very, very insightful.
Thanks.
All right, yeah. Well, so now that we got your origin story and your advice on how to break into comics, so now I want to talk about sort of like the runs that you've done. Sure. So for me, I only know you, like I only knew you at first, like early on when I was reading comics, was with your Daredevil. Because I remember that Paulo Rivera cover with all the onomatopoeias on the buildings. That was so cool. Yeah. But I didn't start reading until you did the whole Devil at Bay story arc and stuff like that. So I just want to know, like, what was it like working on Daredevil, and like specifically, like, my second question is like, why did you decide to take Matt out of Hell's Kitchen? Because like that's such a huge part of his character is Hell's Kitchen.
Right. Well, that was the reason, because it was such a part of his character. I thought it'd
Yeah.
be interesting just to shake things up. That's the reality of doing monthly comics, is that sales on monthly comics always dwindle. I don't care who's doing it. I don't care if you have, Neil Gaiman writing the book. It's still, every successive issue is going to sell a little bit less than the previous one. There's no way out of that cycle. The only way out of that cycle is to do something radical by rebooting the series, or by doing something like that. That's a huge change in the status quo, and
Mhm.
get you some attention and get you some press and maybe get some new eyes on it. Like you didn't come to the book until then.
Yeah.
So that's why. And what it was like working on Daredevil was it was it was one of the best experiences I've ever had, but it's still a lot like working on anything that I do, which is, my method is to get inside that head, like
Mhm.
really think about what your, like, every moment, think about what your life would be like if you had Daredevil's powers. If you, there was literally, when I was writing the book, there's literally not a day would go by where I wouldn't find myself somewhere, mall, grocery store, wherever. And I'd be thinking, how would Matt Murdock perceive this at this
Mhm.
moment if he were here with his super senses? And I was always thinking along those lines. And that, to me, is the key to writing all these characters: is get inside the suit, write them from the inside out, thinking about how each of them, with their different abilities and their different skills, how they perceive the world in a way that I don't. So that was what was right. That was what writing Daredevil was like. It was
Mhm.
constantly thinking about, how does a blind person move through the world with these enhanced senses?
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, you did a really good job from what I've been told with that earlier run as well as the one that I read. I mean, him being in San Francisco was so much fun and such a great change of pace. So
Thanks.
yeah, I appreciate it. It was awesome to read. All right, so
Thanks.
my second question is, all right, so obviously you're also known for your Flash. I heard I'm fortunate I've not read all of it, but I've heard great things about it. Because you mostly build it on Wally West, and for like our generation, like our age, like Wally West was our Flash due to
Yeah,
like the Justice
absolutely.
League animated series and all that other stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that's well again, that's when I say same question, like what was it like working on Flash, as well as like was it how does it feel to like, the like a lot of the stuff you expanded on, like the Flash mythos, like the Speed Force and all that other stuff is still being used like today, like Max Mercury and Impulse is like my favorite speedster. So like yeah, what was it like working on Flash?
That look, all right. Let's get to that one later, because that's a good place to end that question on, which is what it was, the stuff that outlived me. But to going back
Yeah,
to the earlier part of the question, what was it like working on the character?
yeah.
That was my first regular assignment,
Mhm.
and it I was still learning what I was doing as a writer. But the thing that I did know is, and I still hew to this, is that if you're going to be successful doing this, whether it's whether it's something character you created or a character that somebody else handed you, you the first job is to figure out what you've got in common with that character. What are the connections that you have? Because you're going to be writing a bit of yourself in any character that you write, or
Mhm.
else it's going to be wooden. You're going to put some of yourself in any characters. You figure out the part that works, the part that clicks, the part that you latch onto. And for Wally, it was twofold. I was never a big Wally fan before I took the book, to be honest. I always liked
Mhm.
Barry, but I wasn't. I was a Flash fan, but I wasn't a Barry fan, if that makes sense. Like, Barry was just a wooden, a wooden clothes hanger to put a costume on. It was nothing. But the
Mhm.
Flash I thought was really cool, because my my superpower of choice would be super speed.
Mhm.
Always has, always would be. And so that was the first thing I had in common. I love the idea of super speed. And secondly, I realized Wally and I had the same basic background. We were both fans who made good, right? Who managed to get the job that they dreamed of since they were a kid. Wally West was the world's biggest Flash fan,
Mhm.
and was the first sidekick to actually fulfill the promise, and to actually take on the mantle. And I felt the same way about my comics career, right? I loved comics growing up. I always wanted to be in comics somehow, and so now I'm in comics. So we had that in common. And I just built off that. I didn't know enough to write different voices. So that was just my voice. Wally's voice was completely my voice. And I found that I learned a lot about writing, like writing through some of my own problems as I was writing these characters. You don't want to put so much of yourself into these established characters that other people have created, that it just becomes about you. But with Flash, I was able to really find that I was working out a lot of the things about romance that I felt that as a young man, or what I felt about what love was, or what, and that fed into the relationship between Wally and Linda. And the same with Daredevil. When I was writing Daredevil and writing the arc about depression, writing the Purple Man stuff where he deals with depression. And I've made no secret, I've dealt with depression all my life. And so I was able to write from the outside in, or inside out rather. And so that's what it was like writing Flash, is remembering the joy of the freedom of running. That's because I said earlier that I don't do well in an office environment, and I do get itchy if I'm stuck in any one place for some length of time. And that's another thing that you really can transpose onto the Flash is it's about freedom. It's about running. It's about not being encumbered in any way. And that's, again, I was able to bring that to the character. So, and the joy of that. So the other thing that it was like writing Flash was it was a push against everything else that was happening in comics at the time, which is why for the first year, everybody just assumed we would be canceled, because I was not writing what was in vogue at the time, which is dark, grim, somber, cynical comics. I don't write those. I don't work well in that world. I'm not a cynic by nature. I don't have any use for cynicism, both as a person and as a writer. I do think that there's plenty of great comics out there that have been dark and gritty and cynical. I'm not against them, but those are the outliers to me. To me, superheroes specifically are not created for that. They're not created to be cynical. They're not created to be, dark reflections of our world. They're created, they were all created before any of us were born, and they were created for kids as symbols of hope and symbols of right makes might and so forth. And so the further you get away from that on a regular basis, the worse that feels to me personally. So I just can't do that. So I was writing against the tide, and everybody else was writing dark, grim stuff. And luckily, Grant Morrison took notice and started writing a little by his own admission. And Grant and I are good friends. We've been friends forever. But Grant, said, "Yeah, I was looking at your Flash stuff, and I thought, yeah, maybe that's the way to approach it: is big ideas and big emotions, and not, somber death and violence all the time." And then Mark Millar joined on that boat, and then so people started coming over to the good side, or the non-evil side, and that felt good. I mean, I really felt like nobody else was going to write a character like Impulse at that time in comics. And in fact, once more, when we created the character and we launched the book, the sales director at DC Comics, the sales director said, "We can't sell this. This is going to be dead in 6 issues. This is awful. What are you doing?" Well, we got 90 issues out of Impulse. So we did something right, So that's, that in short was my experience working on Flash. To the other part of your question about how, by the way, if you were worried about how we're going to fill 90 minutes, this is obviously not going to be an issue. The idea that writing stuff like the Speed Force or Impulse or Max Breed, stuff that outlives my run on the book, that's the greatest feeling in the world. That is just there is somewhere in my files, there's a photo that someone took of me the first time I heard the word Speed Force said on the Flash TV show. And I was lit up like a Christmas tree. It was so awesome, because they're not your characters. So, you and the agreement going in with these characters, right or wrong, is that I'm going to write the stuff and you're going to pay me for it. And I'm not going to own the stories that I write. And I'm not going to necessarily own the characters that I create. I might have a piece of like Impulse or whatever, but basically they're DC's characters. Speed Force, owned by DC Comics. All these things that you create, owned by DC Comics. And that's the deal. That going in. So there's not any financial remuneration when I hear Speed Force used in the Justice League movie or whatever. But to be perfectly honest, the feeling, the glow that I get when, somebody says the S, Superman's the S stands for hope. I remember that feeling. And I remember the day I heard Speed Force on the TV way more than I would remember what I would have done with a small check for a few $100 that DC might have sent me instead of that. That money would have gone and spent, and I would never remember what I spent it on, but I will always remember that moment when I heard that something that I created sort of not only outlived my time in the book, but became part of the mythos, part of the bigger picture. That's what you really want when you're writing these characters. That's this part you leave behind. That's your legacy, is you're able to say, I was able to contribute something back.
Yeah, your own like personal stamp, like
Yeah.
on the character. Yeah, of course. Awesome. Yeah, Impulse is like my favorite speedster in like
Thanks.
DC. He's fantastic. I love my Young Justice. He's awesome.
I love Bart. I really do.
Yeah. All right. Well, all right. Thanks for the answer on the Flash. So like another question with like, obviously like Kingdom Come. I have to ask a question on Kingdom Come.
Sure.
Since it's like one of the most regarded like most well recognized comics ever, and I just want to know because like I've read it and I found it very interesting the fact you played with the idea of just like heroic justice and vigilantism. So I just wanted to know like why what was your inspiration for that type of story?
Well,
like why did you want to tell that type of story with that dynamic?
well, to be perfectly honest, first off, all credit to Alex Ross, because he was for how many people have actually read Kingdom Come or are familiar with it? Show of hands.
Like,
Okay.
it's right here. I mean, I got the book.
Okay,
right
great.
Here.
And that wasn't fishing for compliments. I just wanted to know who I was, that I was talking to people who knew what I didn't know how much I needed to preface this or give it context. But Alex came to DC after he did that book called Marvels with Kurt Busiek, and wanted to do something similar at DC. And he had the basic nugget of the idea, which is the older heroes have retired, the younger heroes have come aboard, and they have no guidance, and they're assholes, and they're going to make the world worse. And what do we do? And that's really, he had that. He had a bunch of character sketches. He had some ideas for characters in the back of his head, but he had no story. So DC said, well, we need to put you with somebody who knows the DC universe as well as you do. And I'm the only guy. I mean, like, I really, like, nobody knows the DC universe like I do. And, we got along like a house of fire because we were both passionate about these characters. Alex is very passionate about characters who, frankly, who he didn't grow up reading, which was interesting. Like he wasn't passionate about, we were both passionate about Silver Age characters, which were at the tail end of my, of my growing up and way out of Alex's growing up. Those characters were the age of comics he loves was way before he was actually reading comics. So, but we both love that general feel of comics. We both love the characters involved. And so we just went to work building the story out of the basic concept. The hardest part of it was always, why would Superman retire? Because it made no sense. I couldn't figure out why Superman would ever give up and take the suit off. He's the most responsible human being on the planet. And when we figured out the key would be the day that Metropolis decides that the next young hero who comes along, who's willing to kill, who takes the Joker out, is willing to kill villains, and where Superman draws that line, and Metropolis embraces that character and turns its back on Superman. That's when Superman gives up. That's when Superman sees, I got no reason to do this. The unintended consequence of that is something that Superman could never have foreseen because he has no ego. So he could not have foreseen that if Superman gets up and says, I don't want to do this, then every other superhero in the DC universe is like, well, then why am I getting out of bed? If Superman is, then there's no point in me even trying because he's the best, the brightest, the greatest. What am I going to do? So that was the cascade effect of that. So all the heroes retired and the world was left to the new, younger, crazier heroes who just didn't have any sort of ethical or moral guidance. And that was flat out just our commentary on what was going on in comics at the time. That was what was happening in Marvel and DC, was a bunch of jerk ass, characters like Cable, who the name doesn't even mean anything. It's Cable. It doesn't. And again, it turned out to be a good character, and people have made something out of it. But at the time, it was all just guns and violence and big shoulders. That's all every Marvel comic was. So it was our pushback against that. And I think it turned out pretty well. It was a good collaborative process. It took about 18 months, I think, altogether to do. Alex paints 10 pages a month, rain or shine.
Wow, yeah.
So it was, we worked on it, I guess, about 2 years off and on for me, always on for Alex.
Yeah.
And it was a really fulfilling experience. It's not the best thing I've ever written, because I would like to think that in 25 years it's gotten a little bit better. But I'm proud enough of it. And I think that I always want to make sure that Alex gets enough credit for, coming up with the basic nuggets and co-plotting the thing with me just over the phone, just figuring out what to do here and there. So that's my Kingdom Come story.
Awesome. Yeah. And yeah, thanks for giving like a lot more like Alex Ross, because I had a second question, was like, what was like working with Alex? Because he's like one of my favorite artists like of all time. So, and
well,
yeah,
here's the thing. Credit is not a finite resource, right? There's nothing right. I see people hoarding credit sometimes, or wanting to be, it's all me. No, it's not. It's a collaborative process. If you're in comics, you're part of a team, and just, admit it. And there's never any blowback. There's never been a time when I felt like I've given so much credit to somebody else that I didn't get any credit myself. I seem to always manage to get whatever credit I'm due, good or bad, So anyway, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. No, it's fine. But yeah, it's just great book, great storytelling, great art.
Something I'm cut out.
Oh,
you're all frozen.
Oh,
all right, now you're back.
Oh, we're good. Okay, got it.
What happened there? That was.
Yeah, I have no idea. Probably a connection problem.
All right. Anyway.
Yeah, but it's just a phenomenal story. Very iconic, obviously, with Superman and the black S. The designs for that book is
that was
incredible.
Again, it looked great.
Yeah. But anyway, so I have one final question, and then we'll move on to like Q&A from my friends. But all right, so I had an uncle who I read most of my comics from, as my uncle, and he gave me his phone one time at a family reunion. He was like, "Read this comic. It's amazing. Read it." And it's your comic book Irredeemable.
Yeah.
So, and I read it and I thought like it was fantastic. This was years ago, but I just wanted to know, like, again, like what was your inspiration for like doing Irredeemable and Incorruptible later on, like exploring the idea of like the greatest superhero being the greatest supervillain and like vice versa?
Sure. First off, Irredeemable, show of hands, people who know it. I just want to make sure how much context I got to give. Okay, let me give some context. So Irredeemable is basically, if you boil it down to one sentence, the Irredeemable is what if Superman grew up to be a supervillain, was a superhero, became a supervillain. It's a lot more complex than that, because that's easy. That's like a lot of people have done that kind of story. I was interested in doing a little bit of a deep dive on why this would be. As you can tell, you spent a lot of time in my life thinking about this guy, right? So I think about Superman all the time, and know what makes that character tick. And it comes back to Grant Morrison again. He and I were having lunch, and we were talking about the things we love about Superman. And we love Supergirl, and we love Crypto, and we love the Daily Planet. We love the Fortress of Solitude, and it's like gas and just fanning on all this stuff, right? Fanboy on all this stuff. And talking about the stuff in Superman's fortress. He's got the giant battleship that hangs from the ceiling by chains. He's got a dinosaur. He's got the Phantom Zone projector, which puts his enemies into this ghostly void. And he has something called the Zonophone, which allows him to communicate with those trapped villains in the Phantom Zone, to which Grant said, why would anyone want this in their house? All they're going to do is yell at him. What purpose does this serve? Why would anyone have this? I said, we already have it. It's called the internet. And that was the impetus for the whole story. It was, okay, if you were Superman but wasn't raised right, didn't have the moral fortitude growing up, or wasn't taught the right things about self-acceptance and not having to seek outside approval, if you were a very needy Superman and all you could hear with your super hearing is the bad comments. You got super hearing, you're always reading the comments, right? You're always hearing what everybody has to say, and the only thing that's going to stick with you is the times when people go, boy, that guy's an asshole. And you're going to feel disrespected, and you're going to feel like you're doing this for nothing, and it's going to get under your skin, and it's going to turn you, and it's going to eat away at you, and it's going to show and lay bare the parts of you that aren't emotionally equipped to be a superhero. Because the backstory for that character that we spooled out over the 3 years of the series was he basically had Superman's origin. He shows he's rocketed from a distant galaxy and lands on Earth, but instead of being found by the Kents, he's found by a woman, a single, meth head mom with a drug problem who has emotional issues, and she grows up afraid of the baby because the baby has powers, and the baby goes into the orphanage and it's adopted again, and that couple is afraid of the kid because he's got superpowers, and so this kid grows up knowing that everybody fears him all the time. And what does that do to you, and how do you not constantly then seek love and approval from everywhere you go? And that is a terrible foundation upon which to lay all this responsibility of being Superman, because you can't handle it. And so that was what Irredeemable was all about. And Pete Krause, drew it, co-created the characters with me and did a great job with the art. And really good. I would work with Pete anytime, anywhere to this day. And it was successful enough where I did it for Boom Studios, and they came to me and said, okay, we like this. Can you do the flip side? Can you do something that is, what if the world's greatest villain became a superhero? And that took a little bit more thinking, but I was able to turn that into Incorruptible, which I wouldn't have done unless we came up with a title. That was the trick. What's your title for something like that? What mirrors Irredeemable but is not, it's a perfect title because it clearly links to the other one, right?
Exactly.
It's the letter I. It's in the same family. You can know Irredeemable and Incorruptible. They're just sister books. You can just tell by the title. So, and that was a lot of fun too. That was again, what if he wasn't the world's greatest supervillain per se, but he was a bad guy. But he figures at this point, if the worst guy in the world is no longer me, if that's the worst guy and he's been my mortal enemy my entire life, I better do something to set the world straight. I know him better than anybody else. I better start fighting on the side of the angels, or else the world has no hope whatsoever. So
yeah. Oh wow, I mean, I've read some of Irredeemable. It's pretty good, and my uncle raves about it a lot. So
good. Cool.
Yeah, thanks for that. So yeah, I'll open it up to the Q&A if anyone wants to ask anything. So yeah, put your thumb up, the reaction, so I can pick on you.
No one has any questions.
All right,
that's it.
Declan was first. So
hi. So I've looked a lot at your group, like not group work as in the work you do with other people, but the ensembles and the cast that you have in those comics. And like I noticed specifically because I'm a big fan of Cyclops, and like I kind of get salty when people are a bit like
best.
So like I've noticed how much respect and care you put into each character in those ensemble casts, and I was wondering, because obviously you have to care about them, which character that you've written in the past have you felt the most like personal connection to? And then on the flip side, which character, and it might be the same answer, have you felt the worst when you've departed from them?
That's easy. In turn, wait, you mean the one that I felt least connected to?
No, most.
But also then,
which one have you felt like the saddest leaving?
Right. That I see what you're saying. Okay. I mean, Cyclops and I are very much like this. I always like the sort of the sullen genius character that's in the corner. Like I like Robin of the Teen Titans. I like Cyclops. I like Mike Nesmith of the Monkees. I mean, I like Brainiac 5 of the Legion. I like that guy. Reed Richards is my favorite Fantastic Four guy. That's the one I like. I gravitate toward because I grew up as a really smart kid, and because I had bumped up a couple of grades, I didn't really have any friends. I was very alone growing up, and so comics were my pals. So I could gravitate toward the misunderstood genius boy over in the corner. So probably Cyclops. I thought you were also going to ask like who I had no connection with, and the answer there is easy. It's Thor. No connection with Thor whatsoever. That is not to slag Thor. Thor's a great character, but I'm a science kid. I had grew up heavily worshiping science. I had no use for mythology or interest in mythology or magic or anything like that. And so characters like Wonder Woman, Thor, they just elude me. I get it. I get they're great characters. I thought Thor Ragnarok was a fucking great movie. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the characters. It's just I don't respond well to those characters. And if you put them in my hands, I don't know what to do with them. So there you go. Was there another part to the question? Which is who?
Yeah. What character have you felt like the saddest departing, and like you wish you could continue?
Maybe Impulse, but it's a tricky question. The answer on an emotional level is either Wally or Impulse, but the second part of your question is, and do more with, come back and do more. I don't want to do anything more with these characters because it's a terrible trap. Every time you go back and do more of something that you've already done, not only are you competing with you're not only competing with how good that may have been, but you're also competing with people's memory of how good it might be. They're going to remember it being better than it was. Like my second Captain America run is actually, I convinced, better than my first Captain America run. But because the first Captain America run was a special thing and people had never seen that before, they've elevated to the point where no matter what I do with Captain America, it will never be that good. So why would I go back and punch myself in the face like that? Captain America is the only exception, and that's only because Chris Samnee, who I did Daredevil with, wanted to do Captain America. And I figured, okay, well, I wouldn't go back to Cap under any other circumstances, but I want to work with Chris. And I think between the two of us, we can have a fresh enough take. And he's such an astounding artist that people won't be paying attention to me, they'll pay attention to him. And so I was willing to go back for a few issues doing that. But like, I wouldn't take Wally back on a bet at this point because he's a great character and there's things to be done with Wally, but I don't know what to say with that character. And I don't want to, I just don't want to come off like a nostalgia act. Right. So there's a long answer to a short question, but yes. But that gave everybody else chances to think of their own questions.
Taylor had a question.
All right.
I personally am a big fan of your characterization of characters. I like the personalities and the life that you give to them. And I wanted to see like you specifically to work on newer characters that I haven't read, like your take on them. So I was just wondering if like you have a specific character in mind that you really would like to work on one day, or somebody that you would like to maybe put your spin on it.
That I have not. The tricky part is that I have not already done. And the thing is, this is a conversation I have over at Marvel like every 2 years, which is, okay, I've done Doctor Strange for a couple of years. What do we do next? Well, I've done everything. I've been lucky enough to be able to hit all those characters. So I don't know. I mean, maybe Iron Man. I think I have a take on Iron Man, and I think I've got a couple of ideas for Iron Man because I've never written him as a solo character, but him and Thor, that's it at Marvel. And at DC, Batman, I have a couple of ideas for, but I don't have a handle on Batman that's unique and different enough to make me feel like I'm really invested. I'm sure if I thought about it, I didn't have a take on Mr. Fantastic until I started writing Fantastic Four. I'm sure if I started writing a Batman story, I'd find some take on that character. But that's where it all starts. I'm glad you appreciate that, and I'm glad that that's what resonates with you, because to me that's everything. When I teach writing classes, I tell everybody, look, you can have a great plot, you can have an amazing Swiss watch plot that is astounding and beautiful and fits together like a dream, but if I don't want to follow the character, then it doesn't matter. Like, that's when people are reading stories, they want to be with characters that they're willing to follow, that they're interested in. It's become so apparent to me with the show Schitt's Creek, which the entire world loved, and I had no interest in even checking it out. And we started watching a few episodes, my girlfriend and I. We started watching a few more, and I turned to her the other day in the middle of season 3 and said, "I don't really find this that funny. Why are we watching it? But I enjoy watching it. What's that about?" And she says, "Because you want to follow the characters. because you like the characters and you're following them along. You don't love them, they're not hysterical, but so that's where it all starts. If you don't have that, then nothing else matters. So I drill down pretty heavily on that. That's where I always go to. And when I'm writing in ensemble books, I give a lot of thought not just to each of those individual characters, but how each pair relates to each other, how each triad relates to each other. When I was writing Archie, it wasn't just enough to know. Maybe when I sat down to start with Archie, I just started writing like a manifesto. Just here's an info dump of everything I feel and know about Archie, which isn't a whole lot. But as I'm writing, I'm coming up with new ideas and new takes on the characters. And I'm not writing plots. I'm just writing mostly for myself, just sort of stream of consciousness character stuff and who they are and what they want and what motivates them and finding out things as I go. But it wasn't enough to go, okay, here's Archie, here's Jughead, here's Betty. It was also, okay, here's Archie and Betty. Like, what is that relationship? Here's Jughead and Veronica. What is that relationship? Here's Jughead and Archie. How is that a different relationship? When I write team books, my favorite thing in the world to do is to pick like two characters who don't normally get screen time together and put them together in a scene and see what you get. Because, I mean, that's the fun of it to me. That's why I like writing team up books. That's why I like writing things like, Batman and Lobo or whatever. Just give me two characters that don't normally go together, and I will go to town. I'll have a ball. And scene.
Matt, you got it.
So I've got a couple questions. So if nobody else has any, I could go for a little bit.
Go.
But you mentioned that your favorite member of the Fantastic Four is Reed Richards. And I think that really comes through in your run.
Thank you.
It's your take on the Fantastic Four is the most I've ever been interested in Reed. I appreciate what he does, but I don't like him very much. I think he's kind of an
nobody did.
Dickhead.
Nobody did. That was the beauty of taking on that. That's why I wanted to zero into that character, because I looked at him and went, no one under the age of 60 likes Reed at all. Right. He's just there. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's kind of what I wanted to ask is what really appeals to you about Reed and why you chose to latch onto him as your real focal point when you could have chosen any of the other three characters or even Doom, I guess, if you wanted to.
Part of it was the challenge of, okay, everybody has spent so much time there's not much more I can do to make people like Ben.
Right.
He's everybody's favorite character. There's not much I can do to make you like Sue or Johnny more or less or whatever, but Reed was a challenge. Like people don't give Reed any thought. So it was less that I gravitated toward him as a character in that moment as it was, okay, this is a challenge. This is, if I'm going to make my mark on this book, if I'm going to tell you stories that you've never read before, if I'm going to show you stuff you've never seen before, Reed's the perfect vehicle because nobody ever pays attention to Reed and he never gets his own stories. So that was where we dug. And then when I was working with the editor, Tom Brevoort, we started talking about why you would give your team a name, big character names. Why would you give them superhero names? Why would you give them flashy costumes? And we drilled down on this idea of, because it's penance, because Reed feels at his heart that he was a really arrogant guy who took these guys up in a spaceship that wasn't ready for prime time, right, and crashed and basically ruined his friends' lives. And so everything that about building the Fantastic Four, the persona, the costumes, the merchandising, you put them in a big skyscraper in the middle of town and make them super public, is all to give them celebrity, because that's the only thing he could figure to give them to sort of make up for what he's taken from them. And right, when I got that, like that's that I totally get Reed at that point. I totally felt for Reed, and at that point, man, I knew I had him.
Are there any other characters that have grown on you like that through writing them?
It's a good question. I mean, there's generally somebody in every time you hand me something. I'm trying to think. Mm-hmm. It's hard to say because I've loved all these characters since I was like 5. So right, I'm trying. Kyle Rayner grew on me. Okay. Because I was a Hal Jordan guy all the way, and I thought of Kyle Rayner as a cheap upstart, and mostly because I also was there behind the scenes when I saw what was happening with Kyle and how Kyle was created in a weekend as a desperate measure because DC suddenly didn't want to do, any more Hal Jordan stories. And there's no reason that character should have worked, but it did work. And the fact that he was an artist really sort of opened me up. And the fact that he was a little more imaginative about the way he used the ring, that was something that I found interesting. So he grew on. I think that's probably a good example. Kyle probably grew on me more than anybody else.
That's really cool. That's really cool.
Nice.
Does anybody else have questions? I've got a few more and keep going, but I don't want to.
Rebecca does, it looks like.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you were talking earlier about how you don't really like having a boss when you work. So I was wondering, since you do like team books and often they do like crossovers and have their own titles, what it's like creatively working on one of those.
It's fine. I mean, I generally enjoy that. My biggest problem in the world, and the thing that's going to be on my tombstone, is that I cannot tell the difference between a challenge and a death trap. So anytime you come to me and say, we're doing this crossover and it's really complicated, and maybe you could figure out some way to work your way into it, I'm always like, yeah, all right, awesome, I can figure this out. And a lot of times I should have said, I'll pass, thanks, because it ends up being a thankless job. But on the whole, I enjoy that because it is a collaborative medium. I don't like having bosses, but I'm fine with having people that I collaborate with because that's the joy of it to me. There's nothing more dull to me than sitting in my chair and just typing. The fun part is getting on the phone with Tom Peyer or Brian Augustin or Grant Morrison or somebody and going, okay, I've got this thing worked out, but I'm not sure how to get here. Let's talk it out. And then ideas start flying back and forth. That's the fun part of writing. That is a joy. So the collaborative stuff when we're doing team up books or events, or we do 52 where it was 4 different writers. It's fun. I don't feel like I'm losing so much of, I don't feel like I'm losing so much of the story I want to tell. And well, I guess here's the thing. I've never really thought about it this way. So good question. If it were something that I created at a whole cloth, and suddenly it had to be part of a collaborative process, I might feel a little bit, a little bit protective of it. And I might feel it might be a little harder to work in concert with other people because they don't share my vision of this one character that I created. But these aren't characters that I created. So I have a vision of them, but I also am humble enough to understand that my vision of Superman does not mean that your vision of Superman is not valid, is not a way of taking, unless you're Scott, unless you're Snyder, unless you're director Snyder, your vision of Superman is probably as valid as mine. So the Snyder joke was supposed to be funny, but anyway. So when I'm working in collaborative there, it's already baked in. Like I'm not super protective of my work or my stories if I'm in a collaborative process because it's already something where I know I'm the 45th person to write Wonder Woman anyway. So does that sort of answer the question?
Yeah, I think so.
It's just, if you got the right team of people together like we did with 52, it's a blast. It's the 4 of us sitting in a room and having the best ideas because 52 in particular was a great experience for Grant Morrison, Greg Ruckus, Jeff Johns and I together writing these books and swapping pages back and forth and swapping scenes back and forth. And you can't tell in any 20-page issue who wrote what, which we like. And the reason that was fun is because the editor, Steve Wacker, was an improv comic before he became an editor. And so he ran the room like you would an improv room, because what's the basic rule of improv comedy is yes and, right? Yes and, never just say, no, that doesn't work. You just go with the flow. And you run a writer's room like that and you take off because everybody's suddenly playing along and improvising off other people's ideas. And okay, if we did that, then we could do this and we could do this. And the energy is really strong that way. So I really enjoy that.
All right, thank you.
Okay, sure. Who else?
Matt.
All right.
Yeah, I've got more. I don't want to keep going. Declan, you want to talk?
Oh, sure. This is probably a quick one.
Sure.
You mentioned that it gets easier for you to write characters as you grow more connected to them, like with Reed Richards.
Yeah.
Have you noticed the inverse effect too? Like I don't know for sure, but like say like for example, I assume you don't like Namor.
Yeah,
Well,
not so
like
much. Yeah.
oh, I
No.
was just trying to think of like the opposite of Reed
Right.
Richards.
Yeah.
Like, is it harder to write those type of characters, like someone
It's-
not like Wolverine or someone like that you can't easily identify with?
yeah. If you give me Wolverine, they finally got me to write a Wolverine story after bugging me for 15 years. It came out this week. It was actually an anthology book they're doing called Marvel, which is a bunch of short stories about different characters. And I did a Wolverine story only because the painter said, I want to paint a Hulk and Wolverine fight. Can you do that? I'm like, okay, that's okay. 8 pages of that, I can do that. But even then, I had to find my way into the story. I had to find something that I could say about Wolverine that nobody had ever said and try to figure out what that was. And a lot of it came from thinking about, okay, if you're Wolverine, you have these, if you have these enhanced senses and you're fighting the Hulk who's irradiated with gamma radiation, you're gonna feel that to some degree. It's gonna be like like a static charge almost off of him that Wolverine would pick up that other people wouldn't. He can smell Hulk's spore from miles, so you can track the Hulk for half a province in Canada. So that again, that's what I'm thinking. That gets back to what I was saying way earlier about that's how I get into these characters. That even the ones I don't really care for, there's got to be something there that I can latch on to. So, but Thor, you give me Thor, I wouldn't know what to do with Thor to save my life. Actually, I take that back. I know the key to Thor, and I still don't want to write him, but I maintain and will always maintain that the best characters are the ones that you can sum up in like 1 or 2 sentences, right? And in sentences that mean something to everybody and show some universality, right? X-Men is about being alienated, being apart. Spider-Man is about responsibility. Spider-Man's about these things. Thor, if you cut everything down from Thor is about a guy who cannot please his dad no matter what he does. And that sounds funny, but I mean it, because I think that's really the reason that Thor sticks to your ribs in a bunch of ways that a lot of other Marvel characters don't, because everybody understands I cannot please my mom or my dad or whoever, no matter what I do. That's a common thing that everybody can get. Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna take the floor again.
Go.
I want to just. I assume you have a lot of thoughts on Superman. Probably more than probably more than the average person. A lot of my friends, including some people in this call right now, aren't a big fan of Superman. Think he's lame and overpowered and uninteresting. And I'm sure you're. Can you help me win this argument?
Sure, I can unpack my why Superman is cool answer easily.
Awesome.
First off, he's got all these powers. Yes, he's godlike. There's not much you can do to beat him down. But Superman's not about the best Superman story is not about beatdowns. They're not about who wins the fight, because Superman's going to win the fight no matter who it is. Right. It's the fact that Superman has weaknesses that are not always apparent. It's not just kryptonite and magic. It's the fact that he cares about everybody. Yeah. His enormous empathy, if you know how to weaponize that, is the greatest thing you can turn against Superman, right? Because he cares about every single human being. He's going to always be protective of people before he will be protective of himself. He will always put himself last in any situation. He cares, and you can exploit that. Right. He's also faced with. So the way I look at it is, Superman's greatest superpower is not that he can pick up a battleship or stare through a bank vault door. It's that with all of the abilities he has, with all of the power that he has, he could have anything, do anything, take anything, and yet He chooses to be selfless. He chooses to use those powers in service of mankind, not himself. And to me, that's fascinating. Like, that's, why would you do that? What kind of person would do that? What kind of person would always put other people first? What is going through their head? How were they raised? I don't see anybody cannot find those interesting questions, you know?
Yeah.
What would your life be like if you had that ability? That to me makes them interesting. It's also the part that you can relate to that people don't click into. People say, I can't relate to Superman. Well, you're not supposed to relate to Superman. You're supposed to relate to Clark Kent. That's why Clark Kent is there, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're Superman, but you move through a world where everything's made out of cardboard, right? You move through a world where you want to be like all of us. You want to be part of something. You want to have friends. You want to have companionship. You want to be part of we all need that. But with Superman, there's a remove. There's always an automatic remove. He can't jump into a pickup basketball game with some friends because he might accidentally kill somebody. You know, he can't help you move your couch because if he sneezes, he's going to throw it through the ceiling. You know, he could hurt anything. He could take down anything he's got to walk through the world like a bull through a china shop, or the opposite of a bull through a china shop, like a very dexterous bull through a china shop. How lonely would that make you?
Right.
If you can't, and if you have this concern that if they really, they might be afraid of me because of what I can do. There are always going to be people who are going to be afraid of Superman because he is potentially a god.
Right.
That's got to be terrible. It's got to be very, it's got to be very isolating. So I think of Superman living a very isolated, very lonely life. And Clark is his way in, but even then it's still not 100% there. He still can't quite get there. There's just some of the reasons I think Superman is an interesting, compelling character. It's the things that people think of as he's dull because he has all these powers. No. He's interesting because he has these powers. What do they mean to him? How does he use them in service of the world? Why does he do what he does? Why does he do what he does?
Right.
It's not just enough to say because he's a good guy. Yes, but there's got to be more to it than that. And that's what you drill down on. That's the same with all characters. The first thing you got to know about writing any superheroes is what motivates them. And it is never as simple as because they like to fight crime. I mean, that's a cheap and easy, low-hanging fruit answer.
Right.
A much better answer to figure out why Green Arrow does what he does. Green Arrow does what he does because he used to be a have and now he's a have-not. And he saw what an asshole he was when he was a have, when he was part of the 1%. And now he's making up for all the shit he rained down when he was a 1%er who was callous and a dick.
Right.
That's Green Arrow. All these characters have that. You find that what it is that makes each of them do what they do and what motivates them. And I think that makes them interesting. I don't know if I've turned anyone's opinion in the last 10 minutes as I've yammered on, but that's just the start of it. I could talk about Superman all night. So,
well, I have one more quick Superman question then.
Yeah.
I know he's not your character, but I wonder if you have any thoughts on John Kent.
I like the character. It's not to my taste. That's the best answer I can give. It's, to me, the core elements of Superman are two things. One is that he's alone, which means he's not married, which means he has no one else to really share. He can hang out with Batman, yes, but he doesn't have, to me, in my world, the Kents aren't alive. He's not married to Lois. There's no one he can really be with because that's part of the tragedy of being Superman. The character's not interesting unless there is a tragedy to them. And there is, and the tragedy of Superman is that he lost his home planet. He's the only one of his kind in the universe as far as he knew for the longest time. And then he lost his foster parents because death is something you can't stop no matter what your powers are. So these are the tragedies that are built into Superman. And once you start taking those away, then yeah, he becomes a less interesting character. I think married Superman is less interesting than not married Superman. I think Superman who can fly home and have pie with Ma and Pa and talk about what he should be doing next to stop the parasite is not as interesting to me, because then he's not Superman. He's just a guy looking for, sharing his problems with him, get his mom solving his problems for him.
Sure.
So that said, and then that's the aloneness is the one. The other is Clark Kent. The other is the idea that it's a dual identity. The other is the idea that the entire, if you look at the entirety of superhero comics in all their history, if you look at it as a giant inverted pyramid, then the entire thing rests on this. The entire thing rests on whether or not you as a reader believe that this is an effective disguise. And if you don't, that's great. Go watch football. Comics are not for you. If you do, sure, awesome. You bought into the fact that it's all about suspension of disbelief to some degree or another. No matter how realistic your hero is, it's still some suspension of disbelief. Mm-hmm. And so I maintain that one of the reasons that Superman has been a cultural icon for 80 years and why everyone knows Superman and why everybody recognizes Superman is because you don't know what it's like to be Superman, but everybody at some point in their life knows what it's like to be Clark Kent. Everybody at some point in their life feels like, gosh, if only they could see me for who I really was. Mm-hmm. Gosh, if only they could see that behind this pair of glasses is, a really good guy, or, behind this meek librarian shell is, a really vivacious young woman who has something to bring to the table. And, people are judged by their looks all the time. Yeah. And everybody knows what it's like to say, I wish I weren't judged purely by how I look, which is how we judge Clark Kent.
Right.
I think that's a key part of the Superman mythos. And the moment you take that leg out from the stool, I think the rest of it gets shaky. I think there's been some great stories told with Jonathan, and I get that a lot of people love that character exists. And to me, I'll read those stories. I read every Superman story to this day, and I enjoy some of those stories. But there's a part of it that's like, it's not really my Superman's over here. It's not really my Superman, but I'll enjoy it on whatever terms I can enjoy it. So, that's my long Superman story. But that's how I feel about. And you can't unmarry him at this point, because he's been married for like 30 years, for God's sake. Or however long it's been a long time. If you suddenly unmarried Superman, there's 20 years of readers who grown up with married Superman who would think you've broken him. So I don't, the best I can do is every once in a while write a Superman story that's sort of set before all this stuff, or set out of continuity, and then I get to play with the Superman that I can identify with. It's not a better or worse Superman. It's just the one that I think works for me and makes sense to me. There you go.
So speaking of unmarrying characters, there's somebody I want to ask you about, but before we get into that, I want to double check real quick and make sure nobody else has questions.
Yeah. Does anyone have any other questions? Anyone?
I do.
Okay, good.
Robert.
Okay.
Yeah. So you were talking about 52 earlier.
Yeah.
And 52 is one of my favorite comics. It's like the whole year without the big three, and it focuses on like minor characters. But I have to imagine that you talked about how you really enjoyed the process, but did this massive overarching weekly comic weigh down on you? And would you ever do something like that again, or think that something like that would be able to be done again? How comics are now?
We've actually done it on smaller scale. We did Jim Zub and Al Ewing and I did 2 Avengers series the last few years. One was a 16-part story that was the same 16-part weekly, the 3 writers all jamming together, and then we did a 10-part sequel like the next year. Yeah, it works if you've got the right people in the room that have no egos and are willing to check their egos aside. It never felt like an encumbrance. I mean, yes, any job feels like homework at some point or another, but by and large, this did not. This felt like you get to play with your friends. You're in a band and you're jamming and you're just having the best time in the garage, just playing the bass while the other guy's playing the drums. It was not as manic as it might look. I mean, yes, weekly, but we started pretty far out. So we didn't, it's not like we had to immediately start turning in a script a week. We eventually got to the point where we were turning in a script a week, but we had some lead time to think and to let ourselves breathe. And so what it would be was we all sort of decided which of these character tracks we would want to take charge of. Like I basically handled the Ralph Dibny stuff and the Clark Kent stuff, and Jeff Johns mostly handled the Booster Gold stuff or whatever. But it didn't mean that every once in a while we wouldn't just throw back to each other. We would get on the phone once a week, and we would get on a big conference call with the editor, and we would just talk about what we thought the next chapter would be with this story. And people would chime in with ideas. And like I said, every once in a while it would be like, oh, I want to write that. Well, great, you can write that part. I'll write this other part. It would be just the fun of it. We got together 2 big times. When we started the series, and we charted out in rough form about the first 26 issues. And then about halfway through again, we sat down and we did the next 26 issues in the room for about 3 days. And when I say that, it was basically being able to come away with a blueprint that said, issue 31, this happens, this happens, this happens. We don't know how yet exactly, but these are the things that have to happen. So it was a blast. I mean, it really was, there were frantic late nights every once in a while, but it was worth it. So that kind of answer your question?
Yeah. And I'd say that like your enthusiasm shows through in the comic.
Thanks. It's
100%.
The one sad thing about 52 is if you'll look, there's one issue with no writer credits on it. And that is because it was the issue that resolves the Ralph Dibny stuff. And we knew where it was going. I was in charge of that storyline. We knew exactly what had to happen. And we planned it that way for 31 weeks or whatever it was. And we wrote the script, and the publisher said, no, don't like it. Okay, we go back to the drawing board, try again. No, don't like it. He wanted it to be more cynical, more dark, more just ugly, and he did. And also he didn't like Ralph Dibny. The rest of us liked Ralph Dibny. He didn't like the character. So that didn't help. So he wasn't able to put his ego aside and see what made a good story. And eventually we all just gave up. And it's the only issue of that whole run where there's no writer credit, because we all just said, you know what, fuck you. You know what, you think you're so smart, you write the end of Ralph Dibny, and we're just gonna move on to other stuff because we can't make you happy. So that's my only frustrated memory of 52. But it's a little, if you look in the latter run of the book, the last dozen issues or so, there's an issue. So anyway.
May I ask what the original plan was? Was it bring back Sue?
No, it was, although that was another one. I mean, no, it was Ralph had to kill himself. That Ralph had to commit suicide to make that story work, to defeat the villain once and for all. And no matter what, when we got to that point, the publisher said, no, he can't commit suicide. He's got to do something grimmer or do something darker. I don't even remember what happened anymore.
I don't know how you get darker than that.
I know, you would be surprised because it made him a hero. I'll never forget, Jesus, the first meeting of 52, he had this idea in his head that he wanted to share with us, an idea for a scene where Ralph has a gun to his head and he pulls back the hammer and he's ready to kill himself, and he pulls the trigger and nothing happens because the atom has shrunk down and is keeping the hammer from triggering the bullet. And he thought, all right, it's a cool image, but that doesn't really work. And so we didn't do it, but he was so hung up on that. It was, I think in the finished comic, he still committed suicide, but it was for a completely different thing. With Ralph, it was the tragedy of that was the only way to win. It wasn't, he had to kill himself, but it was for the first time, it was not about him. It was more of a sacrifice of life than a suicide, if you will. Whereas he just wanted to be straight up, just Ralph's a jerk, he kills himself. So that's a shame. When we got done with in the last few issues of the book, we were plotting out the last few issues, Grant and I looked at each other in the room and in one breath, both simultaneously said, Sue and Ralph, ghost detectives. And we knew that was going to be what we needed to do with Ralph and Sue. We were going to make them ghost detectives when this is over with. And we were so excited. This is going to be the big thing. And the publisher said, no, he doesn't really like Ralph and Sue. He thinks that's dumb. They're silly, dumb characters because they come from the 60s. So that never happened. there's a lot of things that didn't happen because of that man, but we'll move on because I'm sounding bitter and angry. So let's move on to happier questions. Who's got one?
So when I was listening to you speak about Superman, my favorite character is Captain America, and I couldn't help but draw a lot of similarities, and wonder if it comes from the same vein of like, so Superman is such an important character because he is probably the most human hero.
Yeah.
I think Captain America is probably one of the most important characters because he is one of the most heroic humans.
Yes.
And we kind of see those moral choices being made, where Captain America is choosing to leave the world of humans and enter a world which he'll never truly belong, the world of heroes. Superman is trying to enter the world of humans and leave the world of not leave, but not fully embrace the world of heroes. He wants to keep it humanity. So I was wondering if you kind of draw a lot of inspiration like between those two, like in the same vein.
In that same vein, yeah, I always see them as they're outliers, that don't quite know how to fit in where they want to fit in. They're both the moral compass of their respective universes. And they're both the ones that you can always count on to make the most correct, selfless moral choice no matter what. So that's, that to me is your Superman, Captain America parity. My only regret, the difference between those characters and my regret that DC and Marvel will never do another intercompany crossover is I've had a Superman, Captain America story in my back pocket for 20 years. And I know how to write the two of them together where they're different enough. The core of it is the difference between the two of them is not Captain America and Superman. The difference between them is Steve Rogers and Clark Kent. Clark Kent is all about, he's a journalist. He's all about freedom of information. He's all about, exposing the truth. Steve Rogers is a soldier, and Steve Rogers understands the need for national security on occasion. So that's the conflict you would have between those two characters. So anyways, that'll never happen. So there you go.
All right. Matt, you had one more question?
I think Matt has many more questions.
He has a lot. Yeah, I think you'll be the last one. So
last one?
Yeah, because I gotta close out and we gotta make this man make more gold.
Unless anybody again, let's go around the room one more time. Anybody else has any other questions? Happy to jump in. We'll give
Cal. Okay, Callie will go. She hasn't gone yet. All right.
Sorry, it's just like a more general question because
sure.
So you're really passionate about your characters, like it's obvious in the way you speak about them. I'm just curious, is there any character that you've written for that has been presented in like a cinematic feature that was just kind of disappointing because it didn't resonate with the character you envision?
Yes. Man of Steel is a horrible movie. Yes. That's a slam dunk answer. Man of Steel. Superman doesn't kill. Full stop. Superman doesn't kill. Any child knows that. So Superman. So that doesn't work. Yes. Short answer to a short question. Anybody else? Anybody else who's not asked a question, this is your chance.
Yeah, feel free while he's here.
Nobody else. All right.
All right.
I guess you're up, Matt.
All right. Yeah, I'm gonna go. So my favorite fictional character of all time is Peter Parker. It's kind of my dream to take Nick Spencer's job.
Okay, fair.
So this kind of sounds like a dumb question, but
I'll be the judge of that, but go ahead.
How much fun is it to write Peter Parker?
Oh, it's a blast.
It seems because you're not as associated with him as, the Flash or Daredevil or whatever, but every time I read your Spider-Man, it's such a joy. And so I don't know, how much fun is that to write?
It is the easiest character to write for me. And even more than Superman, even more than Flash, Peter Parker is the easiest character to write for. And the thing you have to remember that when you're writing Spider-Man, the thing you always have to remember is in any conflict, for Spider-Man to win, Peter Parker has to lose, or vice versa.
Right.
And if you don't put that in every story, then it's not quite a Spider-Man story. But so finding that moment, finding that horrible, only would this happen to Spider-Man thing where in order for Spider-Man to win, Peter has to lose or vice versa. That's the constant tension between the two halves of that character. So it's a blast.
Like the thing with Black Cat and your Daredevil crossover.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Fantastic.
Um,
Okay. And I guess if it's all right, I have one more quick follow-up.
Sure.
If you had, I mean, I don't know if you have, obviously, but if you had the opportunity to write amazing, would you?
Yeah, I would. This was I'm being very honest tonight. I'm just being very open. That was the only time in my career a few years ago where I had felt like I'd aged out of the job because I was told, nah, we don't want you to write amazing.
Really?
We'd rather have Nick Spencer do it. And that's great. Good for Nick Spencer. And the feeling, what I was told was, we've read your Spider-Man. Like, everybody knows what your Spider-Man is like, and that's great, but it's not something that we haven't seen before. And we want something we haven't seen before. We haven't seen Nick. So I get that, but I got to be honest with you. That was the first time anybody said no like that. And it really gave me a sense of my own mortality for a short period of time. It's a little scary, but yeah. So I would be, yeah, if you gave me amazing, I do amazing. Sure.
I kind of have a follow-up to that. Would you ever have Chris do the art for it, Samnee?
Yeah. Oh God, yes. I'd have Chris.
I'm
do
also a big fan of his work as well.
I'd have Chris paint my house if I could. I mean, Chris is the best. Chris is. I have never worked with a storyteller who was better than Chris. I've worked with people who are as good or almost as good, but never any better. Chris is just the consummate storyteller and adds to everything he does.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm also reading his book he's doing with Kirkman right now as well, and it's also
Firepower is great. I mean, it goes by really quick, which bums me out. But it really is well done. Yeah.
All right, but like, anyone else have any questions before I close my closing question?
I have a really dumb question.
Hit me.
In Kingdom Come, when they go to the restaurant, did you think about a lot of different items that restaurant would have?
No, I just looked around my house. I looked around my house. I mean, dude, if you could see, I live in fucking Planet Krypton. I've got a Phantom Zone projector over here. I've got I got a bunch of stuff. I live for that stuff. So coming up with a list of things that would be in Planet Krypton was like falling off a log. It was just a shopping list for me. So.
And did you ever make the Dial H for Hero hoagie?
I did. Not only did I make the Dial H for Hero hoagie, but I also had somebody actually make a Dial H for me. It's upstairs. I wish I had one to show off right now, but it's a working H dial. So that's my big passion, is like not just toys, but like screen accurate, if you will, props. That's my big joy. And things that nobody else is going to want when I die, people are going to look at this and go, what is this spinny dial thing? Give that to Goodwill. So anyway. Okay.
Anyone else? Anyone? Okay. Oh, Michael.
Go, Michael.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say I've been pretty quiet during this whole thing, but I just really like to thank you for coming and having this interview with us. I really appreciate it. Big fan of your work. This is mind-blowing experience right here. But I've basically been trying to think of, I can't really think of anything great to ask that other people haven't, but it's kind of similar to something that was asked before, but
sure.
What is your dream title that you could be offered right now? Or if there's just, I was kind of picking up on that. Yeah. So yeah, actually on that subject, is the main thing though would the main drawback to writing the main Superman book right now be just, the new status quo that he's married and has a son, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and again, I cannot underscore heavily enough that is not a judgment on or a criticism of the new status quo. It's just
right.
It's not doesn't feel right to me. So that would be the drawback. But I mean, don't go spreading it around. But there are Superman stories coming up in 2021 from me. Yes,
nice.
That are not subject to that status quo, and we haven't announced anything yet, and some of them are small and some of them are big, but there's plenty of I've been given the keys to the fortress again, which is great.
Nice.
That's very exciting, I think.
Thanks. I'm very excited about it. Yeah.
Any other questions before I ask my closing question? We wrap up.
If you don't mind me asking super quickly,
No,
who
no problem.
is that picture of Superman behind you? Who's that art by? Is it an original piece or?
It's actually in the 1940s. DC had this made. It's by an artist named H.J. Ward, who was a pulp illustrator back then and a reasonably famous painter of the turn of the century. And he did that painting and hung in the DC offices for like 30, 40 years. And at some point in the 70s, someone made a poster print of it. And in my entire life, I've only seen two of them. And one of them I saw at a convention and turned around to get the money to buy it, and it was gone. And then I had to wait another 10 years to find another one on eBay, and I've never seen another one since. So that's one of the things that comes out if the house catches on fire. That's one of the things that comes out under one arm.
That is very cool.
Thank you.
Thank you
The
again
Phantom
for
Zone
being here.
Protector is the other thing. Sorry.
I said thank you again for being here.
You're quite welcome. All right, Michael, take us home.
All right, so my last question, to close it all out. So like everyone else here knows, like I'm a big, like I love Marvel, DC, but I'm a really big like independent comics fan and advocate. Like when I want to do comics and like my potential career as an artist and as a writer, I want to do independent work because it's just, as you said before, like a lot of creative control you have, you know. So I just wanted to ask, like if you want to like share some of the stuff you've done for like humanoids, which I feel like a lot of people don't really know. Well, like some of us don't really know, but like besides me, about like
Yeah.
humanoids and stuff like that. So any products you want to plug or stuff like that?
I did a 10-part series called Ignited, which didn't, I'll be perfectly frank with you, it just didn't connect for whatever reason. So it ran 10 issues and it just ran out of steam because people weren't catching on to it. But I was proud of it. I thought it was an idea that they handed me, which was, what if a bunch of high school students who had gone through a school shooting suddenly got superpowers and were able to fight back against the shit that makes this stuff happen and take the law into their own hands and go do something about gun violence. So that was awesome. That was something I was very passionate about just to begin with. And to be able to write those kids doing sometimes good stuff, sometimes, not great stuff, but, because they're teenagers and they're all thinking differently, but have them face a real world problem. And in that also, we also ran in that book, in every issue, we ran a text page from someone who had actually been a school shooting survivor in the past, like just their story. They're just to, tell us what it was like. Tell us what you feel like we need to hear. So that was a passion project. And it's out in 2 trade paperbacks. I think the second one comes out, or it has already come out. So it's Ignited Volume 1 and Volume 2. It's a pretty good book. And beyond that, I'm the publisher there. So the idea is I'm going to be doing more work through humanoids, but oh my God, publishing is a huge job. And it became a much bigger job in COVID because now suddenly the whole world's falling apart, and it's, trying to keep a publishing company sustainable and trying to keep it moving in a time when nobody can go outside and go to bookstores. That has been a challenge, but that's been taking up a lot of my time. So in 2021, the goal is to do more create our own stuff, do more indie stuff that is not superheroes. I'll always write superheroes. I love superheroes, but I also like detective stories. I also love science fiction. I also love comedy. And so the chance to write any of that stuff is invaluable to me.
Oh yeah, for sure. I will definitely check Ignited out 100%.
Cool.
I've heard of it, but I haven't checked it out. And plus, once I read Irredeemable, I was hooked on your indie stuff already. So
Thanks.
Yeah, but but that's one of Taylor. Do you want to say anything? Because like the president.
Yeah, I also, before that, I wanted to say, did you want to use that closing question that we had in the beginning that you said you wanted to save for the end?
No, he already
kind of-
already established it already for
Did he?
the
Okay.
Flash one. Yeah.
I thought it was a Flash one. Okay.
Yeah.
Right, we're cool. But no, yes, as the president, I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to come out here. This means a whole lot to our club and everything. We're huge nerds of every comic book artist, writer, everything out there. So thank you so much for taking the time to come out here and talk to us. It means a lot.
No, of course, absolutely. It's my joy, my pleasure. Show of hands, how many people want to be writers or are writers or consider themselves writers, right? Here's my advice. Be passionate about what you're writing. Don't write what you think other people want to read. Find ideas that you are so excited about that you can't wait to share with the world. When I was editing at DC, there was one of the books I was editing and I inherited from the previous editor. It was objectively bad. It was like an objectively bad comic book. But I enjoyed reading it. I went to my boss at the time and I said, what is it here? Because it's a terrible comic book, but I enjoy reading it every month. What's going on? And he said, it's obvious. He says, it's because the person who was writing it would write it for free and it shows. And I've never forgotten that. It's you cannot fake excitement. You cannot fake passion. And if you're a reader, you know when the writer is excited and when the writer's not excited. And that's your first chance to check out of a story the moment that you feel the writer isn't energized. So bring that energy to everything you do as a writer. And if you get to a point where you're suddenly not excited, if you get to a point where you call it writer's block because you don't know what to do next, then my theory is the answer, what a writer's block is to me, is your subconscious is holding you back and trying to tell you don't go there. Like you're trying to do you a favor and hold you back and say, you've taken a left turn where you should have taken a right turn, or you've gone in the wrong direction. That's why you're stuck, or that's why you're not excited. That's why you're not passionate anymore. So go back to what I do is I go back to the last place in the story where it worked, where I really felt gung-ho and where I really felt like it was clicking. And then I just turn in a completely different direction just to see what happens. The worst case scenario is that leads me down a dead end road too. That's the worst that happens. But more often than not, I find some new excitement. I find some new energy to that. And I find that I've surprised myself as a writer. And if I've surprised myself as a writer, I'm going to surprise you. This is why when I write cliffhangers, and this is the God's honest truth, I have no idea how to resolve the cliffhanger next issue. I never do. I thought that was a bug for a long time, and I decided eventually it was a feature, because what that means is if I don't know how they're going to get out of it and you can't guess, then we're both going to be surprised. So you win. If I can surprise myself, I can't surprise you without surprising myself first. So just bear these things in mind when you write. Be passionate and bring your energy to it. Okay. That's it. I'm going to wrap up then. I'm going to go grab some dinner and then get back to working on Marvel stuff. So
thanks again for just talking with us. We really appreciate it. Yeah. But
all right.
Continue making gold. Make some gold.
All right. Have a great evening, guys. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.